Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Liu, thanks for coming. Good to see you again. I wanted to follow up a little bit on the conversation we had in my office a week or so ago. As you know, I'm very concerned about the implications, the effects of this huge new series of regulations, most of which emanate from Dodd-Frank. As you know, we've seen over 9,000 pages of new rules and regulations already, and they're not close to being finished. And when Jamie Dimon famously questioned Chairman Bernanke about the cumulative adverse effect of all of these new regulations on the availability of credit and on job growth, Chairman Bernanke acknowledged that they don't really know what the cumulative effect is and don't seem to have a way of analyzing and understanding that. So, as Treasury Secretary, of course, and head of the FSOC, you will be arguably the most powerful financial regulator in the world and have a great deal of influence over this. My question for you is, what are your thoughts about how we ought to think about the unintended and adverse consequences of this really massive new wave of regulations? I'm particularly concerned about small and medium-sized banks, which are not at all systemically important, but nevertheless are hiring more compliance officers than loan officers because they have to afford this. Shouldn't we understand the implications that this has, and what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Senator. I think we need to be very much attentive to the burdens of really all regulations that we put forward, particularly in an area as important to the economy as the financial services area. I think we also have to be attentive to the cost of failure to regulate appropriately. We saw in 2008, 2009, the enormous loss of economic power in this country because of the financial crisis, the burden it put on individuals and businesses, the burden it put on taxpayers. So as we look at the costs and benefits, we have to look at the systemic risks and what are the consequences of a failure to regulate properly. I know that each of the agencies that are working on this are working in their areas trying to get their hands around that. It is complicated. It is something that, if confirmed as chair of FSOC, I would urge all of the regulatory agencies involved in implementing Dodd-Frank to pay close attention to.
I would hope so, because as you know, the vast majority of financial institutions in America have no systemic significance because they're not big enough to. And yet they are often caught up in a whole lot of regulations that impede their ability to extend credit, and that's one of my concerns. Second issue.
Senator, I would look forward to working with you to making sure that the provisions that were intended to not put those kinds of burdens on those smaller institutions are being implemented as intended.
Terrific. On a separate topic, you may be aware of a huge expansion in a relatively new form of tax fraud. We've seen this in Pennsylvania, where criminals steal a Social Security number, they submit a tax return to the Treasury seeking a refund, and they get it. The unsuspecting victim, whose identity's been stolen, wonders why they never get their refund. It's because someone else got an unrelated and fraudulent refund. The IRS, I think, believes this could be on the scale of tens of billions of dollars a year. They've made some progress. I'm glad that they included Pennsylvania in a pilot program to work more closely with local law enforcement authority. But I think a lot more needs to be done, and I think it can be done. I think the technology exists to largely solve this problem. Are you prepared to commit to making sure we get this under control?
Senator, I am. My understanding is that the IRS has put a good deal of resources behind this, has made a great deal of progress. It is a pernicious kind of crime, identity theft, and the President spoke to this issue last night in the more broader context of cybersecurity. You know, we have a whole new level of criminal activity where very clever and creative criminals are trying to get a step ahead of systems that are going to need to get a step ahead of them. And if confirmed, I would work with the IRS Commissioner to make sure the IRS was doing that. I think we also need cybersecurity legislation for the broader threat.
Last question. Understanding, as we all do, that monetary policy is the realm of the Fed, the Treasury Secretary is nevertheless responsible for managing our nation's debt, for borrowings. The value of the currency is necessarily very important and integrally related in that. There's a number of countries that seem to be inclined to deal with their fiscal problems by devaluing their currency, and some might argue that the behavior of the Fed would be consistent with one that was intended to, in time, devalue our currency. I'm just asking if you will be a vocal advocate for a strong dollar policy and acknowledge that a strong dollar that maintains its value is a necessary precondition of strong growth.
Senator, Treasury has had a long-standing position through administrations of both parties over many years that a strong dollar is in the best interest of promoting U.S. growth, productivity, and competitiveness. If confirmed, I would not change that policy.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.